Here we go.
Bang, bang.
Okay. Embolden 1 and 2. For chapter 10, we are on page 71 of your little atheist book. What significance do eyewitnesses bring to a case, and how does that translate to the validity of the New Testament? So let's start with eyewitnesses in like a trial. What do they bring to that case? Yeah.
Different
Points of view, yeah, of the same event. Good. What else? In other words, they share their experience. Yeah.
Details and objective facts.
Okay, details, objective facts. We read in class today about a detail that is in the New Testament in John about where Jesus was in the temple treasury, and when he was speaking to the Jews at one point in John 8. And that's an earmark of an eyewitness. If you're not an eyewitness, then you don't give those details, right? Y'all have taken or are taking, American history. You've taken world history. You've studied World War I, right? Does it give you like intimate details of each soldier's experience? No, it gives this sort of 30,000 foot level of World War I. But if we could have my grandfather here today, who was in World War I, he would tell us details that he experienced, that he saw, that he heard, and that would be very different than just a textbook with that kind of higher up view. It gives us those details and those truths. And they bring credibility to the narrative. It's one of the reasons why I bring in last year when we did with the seniors, one of the lessons we did was on racism. And I brought in Mary's grandmother, who walked with Dr. Martin Luther King in a march one time. And she's lived it, right? I could stand in front of them and talk about racism with all my whiteness, right? She lived it. She experienced it. And her stories were much more credible than mine because of that. She had firsthand knowledge. So they bring credibility to the narrative. They saw the events with their own eyes, right? And they heard what he said. We believe, like, if you would have been here for, her name was also Mary. Mrs. Ingram, actually, she just got married. If you would have been here for that, you would have believed her, right? We believe other eyewitnesses. Why don't we believe these? Why don't we believe John? Why don't we believe Matthew? Why don't we believe Peter, Mark, basically what to write? Write down some scriptures whereby the authors and their counterparts describe how they were eyewitnesses to certain events. Some that you mentioned, and I would rather have the story than the address of it. I'll give you one. Paul gives a firsthand account of his trials before Agrippa and Festus, and they're quite detailed because he lived it. What else? And he also gives an extraordinarily detailed explanation of Christ meeting him on the road to Damascus.
2 Peter 1:16. Not full of literally invented stories about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but they were eyewitnesses.
Yeah, Peter's claiming to be an eyewitness. And John, at the end of John, says the man who writes this saw it. And it's just after he describes the crucifixion. And basically he says, I know this is true. I was there. I saw it happen. So we've got even within Scripture people claiming to be eyewitnesses. Now, I know I didn't ask you to write this one, so you can write down the answers we talk. How do you know that the New Testament has reliable eyewitnesses? How do we know they're reliable? Not all eyewitnesses are. Yeah.
There's so many of them.
Okay, there's so many of them. How else? Yeah.
They had nothing to claim.
That story got them into big trouble. I might tell a different story. You ever told a different story just to stay out of trouble? I have. Yeah. But they didn't do that. And then we also know from history that they give accurate details. Give me a second. In one of the Gospels, I think there's a mention that historians said that that pool never existed, but they just hadn't uncovered it, and they found it exactly where I think it's in John, the Gospel writer said. So they give accurate details, and we know from history, we know from archaeology that what they have written is true. And they claimed things that were falsifiable if they were not true. There were ways there were people. Paul says, and you're going to get to this. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, he says that Jesus appeared to more than 500 witnesses at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep, some are dead. And he's basically saying, if you don't believe me, go ask them. If it wasn't a true story, if it hadn't happened, then they could have gone and said, look, this is what Paul is saying. Is that true? It would have been easily declared to be false. Christianity never would have gotten off. Okay, let's look at these quick questions. Who are considered to be some key witnesses in the New Testament? Just shout them out. Peter, Paul, John, and Ringo. No, I'm sorry. Who else? Luke. Luke actually wasn't an eyewitness. But he interviewed eyewitnesses. James, Mary Magdalene. Jude was written by Jesus' brother, half-brother, Judas, and as was James also. That's not James like John's brother. That's James, the brother of Jesus. They didn't become Christians until after the resurrection, which is proof in itself, right? That they went from not believing in Jesus his entire ministry after the resurrection, believing. Describe whether Paul and Peter's defense of their eyewitness testimonies was credible or defenseless. Yes, Laura.
I say credible because they were willing to die for the cause, so how do you actually, and that's a lot.
Yeah, they had everything to lose and nothing to gain. And they spoke boldly to people who also knew but didn't accept the truth. And they spoke boldly to people who were in a position to punish them for the very things they were saying. All they had to say is, we made it up. They didn't do that. Not one of them. What is some evidence proved by Colin Hemer that confirms Luke as a solid eyewitness? So I put too many to list, but the topography, the geography, the languages, the leaders that were in power at the time, the religious practices and customs, and all of those things are accurate, and both in the Gospel of Luke, but also in Acts. And Acts is a history book, and all of those details could have been easily proven false, but none of them has been. They are all spot on. What sort of evaluation do historians give Luke and his recorded accounts in the book of Acts? What part do they accept? Yeah.
Like all the historical details.
Yep, all the historic details, they go, yep, that's all true. But what's the part they don't? Yeah, the miracles, the supernatural stuff. The natural stuff is true, but the rest of it is not. So if he's truthful, he's believable, no matter what he's giving. Okay, so I'm going to have you read, look at page 261, and I'll write this on the board. And then we're gonna knock off a little bit early. So what you don't get done will be homework. I want this done for tomorrow because I have something I need to go over with you briefly at the end of the class period. So you're going to start with is Luke's gospel, and then you're going to read on page 268 to the end of page 268. So you'll stop on 269 where it says historical crosshairs, and then you're going to answer quick 5 and 6. So you're reading 261 to 268, and doing quick 5 and 6. So you can begin working on that, and we'll come back and